They say every criminal deserves his day in court. I encountered the first of the two. This first one was the most difficult. Although I was not the main character in this process, I was very involved in it. My loving wife finds herself at the center of this investigation. Almost everyone in the city gathered to see the civil lawsuit. This was a serious infringement claim brought by the victim's wife. She claimed that my wife was directly responsible for her husband's loss of ability to function and earn a living to support his family. Yes, he was sure he couldn't get a conviction on the murder charge or even the assault charge against Tammy, so he didn't file any charges. This angered Samantha to the point that she decided to sue Tammy for her husband's loss of ability to function. Two women who had once been, if not best friends, then at least polite acquaintances, were now fighting with their fists over what had happened to the man one of them had once been married to. My wife Tammy maintained that what happened to Bob was a terrible and tragic accident for which she was in no way responsible. On the other hand, Samantha insisted that it was Tammy's fault that Bob ended up somewhere he never should have been. She also argued that Tammy was directly responsible not only for pushing Bob into the situation he found himself in, but also for being negligent in maintaining a safe environment in that place. What they both didn't realize was that what happened to Bob wasn't entirely an accident. It was foreseen and calculated, if not planned or executed. The random nature of the incident gave it a brilliant edge. I had my own opinion about who was to blame. I believe that Bob himself is directly responsible for what happened to him, and I am indirectly responsible since I actually triggered these random events. I wasn't a suspect, and I kept my mouth shut. I was there to provide some information about the device that led to what happened to Bob. I stepped out of my black Thule 12 Mustang in the courthouse parking lot. A crowd of people had already gathered there. I noticed the district attorney and one of his assistants heading towards the courthouse when I found the strength to walk through the crowd. I found it interesting that, in this case, the prosecutor decided not to file charges, waiting to see what would happen in a civil suit. Usually the process went in a different order. I saw an elderly couple moving quickly towards me. The man grabbed me by the shoulder and turned me to face him. "Dave, you have to help her," he said. "I don't know what happened to her. She's definitely not the same little girl I raised, but she's still the woman you married. I think it was a hormonal imbalance or temporary insanity that led to this. But despite all this, she loves you. She maintained this throughout this entire nightmare." "I'm not sure what I should do or even what I can do, Mr. Bissam Miller," I told him. He looked offended. "I'm not really here to say anything about Tammy. As far as I understand, I will only answer questions about the device. Also, I need to be very careful about what I say about Tammy personally because what I say, if it goes public as part of this lawsuit, could affect my divorce." He looked as if I had punched him in the stomach without warning. "Is it so bad?" he asked sadly. "When did I become Mr. Miller instead of Dad?" It was a really awkward moment, and for a second neither of us knew what to say. "Her lawyer may decide to ask you some personal questions about Tammy's character and personality. Since I'm warning you about this, you might want to have your friend's lawyer resolve them, or just resolve a couple of them before he objects," he said. "As for this divorce, it's really nonsense. There should be no divorce. You two should go to counseling and work on putting this tragic incident behind you." He looked around when we both noticed a couple walking towards us at the same time. "I think you should come into this court and sit next to her," he continued. "I know right now you're still in shock and frustrated and angry about all of this, but damn Dave, you need to put your petty grudges and ego aside and support your woman." "Are you questioning a witness?" asked a deeper voice. My soon-to-be ex-father-in-law was interrupted by another older man. This one was also with his wife. "Leave him alone and just let justice be done," the newcomer said. "Perhaps I should tell the judge that you are here trying to influence a witness to help your daughter. Dave is the victim here. He'll be better off without her." Tammy's father turned and punched the other man, Bob's father, in the face. Within seconds, two men over 60 years of age began fighting and rolling on the ground, while their wives hissed and spat at each other. I turned around and continued toward the courthouse as building security descended on the scene and separated the fighters. When I finally got into the courtroom, Tammy's lawyer directed me to the bench where she was sitting. I shook my head and walked to the third row on the opposite side. 2 rows ahead of me, I saw a cascade of red curls as Samantha took her seat. Moments later, the trial began. Lawyers posed and battled as they presented their cases. Samantha's lawyer began by talking about Bob. He was described as a very popular local businessman and a man of the people. The lawyer created an image of Bob that made him seem almost saintly. Tammy's lawyer then refuted all the accolades presented by his opponent. He portrayed Bob as an evil and devious predator who lured unsuspecting women into perverted and bizarre sexual shenanigans while ignoring his own wife. He also added that Samantha's sexual coldness may have been what pushed Bob to seek extramarital affairs. He claimed that Samantha knew what Bob was doing and often sent other women to be killed so she wouldn't have to participate. Reporters from local and several state and national newspapers were treated to sensational legal fireworks. No doubt they will sell an incredible number of newspapers before the matter is over. I was not called as a witness for more than an hour. By then my lawyer had already arrived, and I told him about Mr. Brennexy Miller's request. "Hell no," he snorted. He leaned low, ostensibly so as not to distract anyone from Tammy's lawyer's monologue. He whispered something to Samantha's lawyer, who nodded and answered in a whisper. Although I was not in the dock here, my lawyer decided to come to the trial. He wanted to be here to prevent me from doing anything that would interfere with my efforts to divorce Tammy. He and Samantha's lawyer exchanged information as Sam was also divorcing Bob. I walked up to the witness stand and took the oath. Tammy's lawyer smiled at me as he approached me. "Can you state your name to the court and describe your relationship to the defendant and to the unfortunate Mr. Entrust?" he asked. "My name is David Pike," I said calmly. I'm still married to Tammy Pike. Bob Antrust is my neighbor, my golfing partner, and, until recently, my friend. You have heard Mr. Entrust described in 2 different ways. To some, he was described as an angel, and to others as close to the devil himself. How do you feel about him?" he asked. "Objection," Samantha's lawyer shouted. "On what grounds?" asked the judge. "The witness is clearly hostile to Mr. Entrust due to the improper nature of the relationship between Mr. Entrust and Mrs. Pike," Samantha's lawyer said. "Satisfied," said the judge. Tammy's lawyer backed down and began another line of questioning. "Mr. Pike, do you recognize this instrument?" he asked me. I looked at him. "Yes," I said. "I believe I made it." "How did you come to make it, and when was it made?" he asked. "I think I did it because I love Tammy," I said. I hesitated and shook my head. I clasped my hands together, gritting my teeth. What I wanted to say is that I loved Tammy. So when she started gardening, along with half the women in our area, I wanted to support her passion. One of her main problems was controlling weeds between small plants. It was also problematic that it required a lot of effort. Being an engineer, I like to tinker with things, so I went into our small shed to look for one of the garden tools that I could modify for the job. We have one of the few houses in our area with a detached garage and barn. We needed a shed to store gardening and gardening supplies. I hated having that junk next to my Mustang, especially because Tammy was a great wife. Well, I thought so, but she had a tendency to be a little promiscuous and a little sloppy, so I just decided that keeping my car stuff and garden stuff separate was a good idea. This saved us a lot of arguing. So that day I went into the barn and almost hurt myself. I remember opening the door and being blinded by a flash of intense pain. I don't think I was actually knocked out, but I was definitely stunned and definitely fell on my ass. It turned out that, as usual, Tammy had neglected to clean up her toys. As I entered the barn, I stepped on the raised end of the rake. The stalk hit me in the face. Anyway, after a few days, I decided to take a rake and drill a hole across the handle at the opposite end. I installed a long, thin tenon through the hole. I showed Tammy and some women in our area how to use them the next day. I called it Pike's Bayonet, which was a bit like car racing. I ended up making a few more of these for a couple of other women in the area, and until a few weeks ago, I didn't think about it anymore. So when was the last time you saw the one you made for your wife? I mean, your ex-wife, he asked. About a month ago, I said. I tensed for a couple of seconds while he looked at me and decided not to try to use me as a character witness for Tammy. As I looked at the handle of the rake and the shiny thorn that protruded from it, a chill ran down my spine. I thought about trying to sell it and even took one to a local garden center, but they had too many ideas on how to change it or improve it, and they all wanted me to do all the work and give them most of the profits. One suggestion was to remove the rake head from the other end, and now, looking back, it might have been a good idea, but I just gave up. Tammy still had one and used it a lot in the garden, but I lost interest in it. How would you describe your ex-wife? Is she an emotional person or? He started. Before he could ask me anything else, my lawyer intervened again. Objection, he said. My client is currently in the process of divorcing his ex. Anything he says for or against her can be used against him in this case. It is also very unethical to ask such questions of a witness during a period of deep emotional turmoil. He's here as an expert witness, Tammy's lawyer snorted. The two things he is an expert on are this subject and his wife, and we finished talking about the subject. While they were arguing, I thought about his question. What was Tammy like? When I first encountered Tammy, I was working hard in college. We were about the same age, but she didn't study. I saw her on campus at a few parties, but she was a mystery to me. She earned minimum wage working at a fast food restaurant near her school. I was surprised that a woman who knew most people our age at school would not consider studying there. Tammy was also difficult to describe. She taught me a lot about how to judge a woman's appearance. Tammy wasn't exactly beautiful, but she wasn't ugly either. I would describe her as sweet. I thought she wasn't the kind of woman who could stop traffic, but she also wasn't the kind of woman who could stop time. I think the main reason why some lucky guy hadn't taken Tammy yet was because she had quite a famous reputation. She was not a libertine at all. She wasn't the kind of girl who came to a party and immediately went up to the rooms. But it was pretty established that if you asked her out, you'd almost certainly get sex. She dated and slept with many of my friends. I even went on double dates with her as the partner of some of my best friends, and at some point we got to know each other quite well. Most of my friends who dated her didn't complain. Some of them met her several times. Others met with her sporadically over long periods. They all smiled when they mentioned her name. Tammy had short brown hair at the time. In recent years, she has let them go down to her shoulders. She's not tall, and while she's not fat, she's not skinny either. Her waist is a little wider than optimal, but not so wide as to be soft or unpleasant. Her legs are also quite large, but in the right lighting they are sexy. She has a big round butt and big breasts, and those are her best assets. Those big breasts and big ass made Tammy stand out among girls that most men would consider average, and while she wasn't a beauty, she was sexy. There are times when a man passes by a beautiful woman to get to a sexy one. So while Tammy didn't have what some might call a steady boyfriend, she never missed male company. There were times when we would see each other and smile or wave just to be polite, but during my first 3 years of college, Tammy and I never dated. However, this has changed in the last year. It was one of those rare evenings when Tammy didn't have a date. She decided to go to a party on campus that was being hosted by one of the student fraternities. When Tammy arrived alone, one of the frat boys decided to take her up the back stairs. Tammy called out to me when she saw me. The look of horror on her face told me everything I needed to know. "Hey, Bart, Tammy is with me," I said. I couldn't think of anything else, and Bart was huge. He was the center on our football team. Bart was the biggest Iowa State guy I've ever seen. Even today, I'm sure I could use one of his old shirts as a cover for my Mustang. He smiled, nodded, gave me the okay sign with his thumb, and turned to look for another girl to take upstairs. I nodded back to Tammy and walked back into the main room. Tammy followed me. I was just about to ask another girl to dance when I felt a hand on my shoulder. "Dave, I'm with you, remember?" she said. "If you start dancing with other girls, that gorilla will come back and try to force me to come upstairs. So today you're stuck with me." She smiled as she said this, and although I didn't think Tammy was my type, I nodded, thinking that good deeds don't go unpunished. The night went better than I expected. Tammy was easy to talk to, and we felt very comfortable with each other from the start. It was probably a combination of two factors. The first was that we had been on a few dates, although not as each other's couple. And the second was that, as I said, Tammy wasn't my type, so there was no pressure to try to impress her. We had a great time. This made me wonder why I had never met her before, and to show that we were on the same page, as we prepared to leave, she looked at me. "Dave, why have we never met?" she asked. She looked very serious and had her hand on my shoulder. It was almost like despair. "Maybe it just wasn't in our cards," I said lightly. "But that doesn't mean it has to stay that way. Tammy, do you want to go on a date with me someday?" "No," she said in the same serious tone. "Dave, I don't want to go on a someday date. I want to go with you tomorrow night." Then she looked at her watch. "It's actually after midnight, so I mean tonight." That evening was our first date. We happened to meet one of my friends who was on his first date with a new girl. He smiled and nodded at me, but I didn't understand why. He asked if we wanted to join them, but Tammy quickly told him we had other plans. "Dave, I wanted some alone time with you," she said. "I don't want to go to the club. I don't want to go to the party. I just want us to get to know each other better." And we found out. We went to a movie together. It was one of those horror movies with blood and guts. I let Tammy pick the movie, and I think she picked it so she could grab my hand. Then we had dinner in a small, cozy restaurant and finished with a walk along the river. Then I realized that something had changed. The first time we had sex that night was wild and crazy. Tammy literally let me do whatever I wanted and did the same in return. But the second time was the one that really amazed me. That time we made love. It was after midnight and Tammy got out of bed. She rummaged through her things, found her phone, and made a call. "Yes, Mom," she said. "It's me. Lisa and Brandon had a huge fight. She is very upset about this. I'm going to spend the night with her and come home tomorrow. I love you too, Mom." Then she crawled back across the floor and got back into bed with me. We started kissing tenderly again and fell asleep in each other's arms. Over the next few weeks, things became more complicated between Tammy and me. Some of my friends noticed that I was dating Tammy and commented that I was probably really into it. My best friend Jeff Thomas even told me to tell him when I was done with her because he missed her. He started talking about what he did to her. It made me wonder what exactly I was getting myself into. On the one hand, I started to fall in love with Tammy, but on the other hand, she looked like a real slut. Tammy noticed the difference in my mood and asked about it. "David, what happened?" she asked. "Tammy, I know you love me," I began. She went into shock. We never told each other about our feelings. It was almost a huge mistake on my part. I almost let a cat out of the bag that I probably couldn't put back. "I never said that," she blurted out angrily. "When you assume." But she never finished her statement. She just looked at me confused. "Davy, what are you, a psychic?" "It doesn't matter because I think I love you too," I said. "But I keep hearing things from my friends and—" "You're afraid of being seen with a slut, right?" She spat almost in tears. "You're right, Davy. Guys talk about me. I've dated a lot of guys. I've had sex with many guys. I like sex. You don't seem to mind having sex with me. Why is this so? Why is a guy who has sex a Casanova and a girl who does the same is a slut?" She looked at me with tears streaming down her face. "Okay, Davy, I understand," she said. "You're tired of me too. You need someone new, or maybe no one at all. So to get away from me, you throw my past in my face. I wish I could give you yours, but every girl you've dated has told me how cute you are. Not that I need them to tell me this, but I'll make it easy for you. You won't have to date me anymore, and I'll let them all know that it's not your fault. And if you ever shut up, maybe we could talk about it, I said, covering her mouth with my hand. Tammy, I don't care about the past, I said. I'm worried about the future. She looked at me strangely. What is the future? Can you see the future? Is this another one of your psychic powers? Our future, Tammy, I said. Do you still want to date me? She asked. She wiped away her tears, and her smile lit up the room. No, Tammy, I said. I don't think this will work. Oh, she said, almost starting to cry again. I began to realize how much control I had over her emotions. I then realized that she truly loved me as much as I already knew. Tammy, I thought that maybe you and I were supposed to be exceptional, and that maybe when I graduate in a few months, we should get engaged, but I'm a little worried about. Before I could finish speaking, she was already on my lap and had her arms wrapped around me. I'm a little worried about. I managed to interject between kisses. Stop worrying, she said, kissing me again. Davy, I will never cheat on you. I've never cheated on anyone. I was never in a relationship with any of the guys I dated. We went out and had sex. Like really, I want you to think about something. Of all the guys I've dated, have you ever heard of me sleeping with some guy while I was dating another guy? I had to admit that I didn't hear. Of course you didn't hear, because I never did it, she exclaimed. And Davy, there is something special about you. You are my first boyfriend. The rest were just guys I dated without commitment. But you're also the first guy I've ever spent the night with. With every other guy after sex, he went his own way and I went mine. When the sex ended, there was no point in staying together. But with you, Davy, I dream of just lying in your arms. I love waking up with you. Ask all your friends if I've ever woken up with any of them. It made sense. This was probably the reason I knew what I knew. She looked at me with despair in her eyes. I believe you, I said. So I'm officially your girlfriend? She asked excitedly. I smiled and nodded. And I can tell everyone? Yes, I said, smiling. Some people were very happy for us. Tammy's parents seemed delighted. I was the first man she brought to their home. I think both of her parents had heard rumors about her around town, and seeing her in a seemingly stable relationship made them feel more at ease. Her close friends were also happy for her, although a little surprised. This surprise increased when she suddenly stopped going to parties or going out without me. She didn't even go to girls-only nights. Why do I need it? She asked. The whole point of bachelorette parties is to go out and meet guys. I already have mine. There were also a few girls who weren't as happy for her. These included some of the girls I dated and a few others who thought Tammy was a slut and didn't think she deserved a nice guy. But the people who were most upset about us were my friends, including my best friend Jeff. A group of them talked to me at school about it. What the hell are you up to, Dave? Jeff asked. He seemed to be their representative. Tammy is not the girl you want to spend your life with. You date her for a while and then move on to someone more suitable. Then someone else will be with her. Or if you're in a relationship, Tammy is your girl. Maybe it was, I said, but it won't be like this anymore. From now on, Tammy belongs only to me. Yes, she will cheat on you at the first opportunity, he said. Jeff, we've been friends since we wore short pants, I said, and I appreciate your concern, but don't call her a slut again. I'll call her whatever. He suddenly fell silent as my fist hit him in the jaw. Jeff and I have fought several times over the years. We were both quite athletic. I was involved in track and distance running, and Jeff was a serious baseball player with ambitions to go pro. My first blow set his ears ringing and Jeff was stunned. He was also furious. He swung wildly at me, but my reflexes, honed at the start of a running competition, helped me. I dodged and Jeff punched the brick wall behind me so hard I swore the building shook. Jeff began screaming in pain and jumping while holding his right arm. "Let's get it," he said to the three other guys who came with him. They looked confused and then ran away. Both apparently had better senses than Jeff. When the three guys disappeared, I turned to Jeff, who was still groaning in pain on the ground. I picked him up and took him to my old, but still powerful 1988 Mustang. This car was my first. It took me from getting my license at 16 to graduating from college. My parents bought it, but I didn't care. I loved this car. Jeff was so stunned that he barely understood what was happening. I took him to the hospital on campus. I filled out his registration form at the admissions office and called his parents. I also called the baseball coach. As it turned out, nothing happened to either of us. I was originally suspended from the track team for fighting, and Jeff and three other guys were suspended from the baseball team. Three guys had their suspensions overturned because they showed good judgment by refusing to get involved in the fight. My suspension was overturned because I showed leadership by stopping the fight and taking Jeff to the hospital. Jeff's suspension was overturned because he was no longer on the team. Jeff had multiple injuries on his arm. It took 4 surgeries and numerous pins and staples to restore Jeff's throwing arm. Doctors say he will eventually be able to regain near normal, albeit very fragile, use of his arm, but with certain limitations. I thank the heavens that I dodged it, because with all the damage Jeff did to his arm, I could only imagine what he would have done to me if that punch had landed. Unfortunately, one of these restrictions was that Jeff would never be able to throw a baseball again. He would also have to reconsider his career because baseball was his true passion. Most of his activities were directed towards this, and he had an alternative career in the field of physical training. Now Jeff couldn't lift anything heavier than 7 pounds without risking injury to his right arm. He will also have to limit activities that require fine motor skills with his right hand. Even Jeff's signature changed. It took both of us a long time to get over it. I often wondered why Jeff was so eager to sleep with Tammy that he tried to hit me hard enough to kill me. It's hard to imagine your best friend literally trying to kill you over someone or something that doesn't belong to him. Years later, I finally found out that Tammy was Jeff's first, and that every time he broke up with the girls, he always returned to her bed. At the time of our argument, Jeff had just been publicly dumped by one of the cheerleaders, so he was humiliated and really needed her at a time when Tammy was unavailable. His anger and hormones combined to make him crazy enough to try to kill me and ultimately destroy his career. For Tammy and I, everything worked out as if it were meant to be. A lot of guys thought I was stupid, and a lot of women did too, but I knew Tammy loved me. I also knew that I would find out if she ever cheated on me. In fact, I knew something about Tammy that no one else knew. Tammy and I got engaged as planned on the day of my graduation, and less than a year later, we got married. Married life has been wonderful for Tammy and I. I took a job as a construction manager and worked hard to provide Tammy with everything she wanted. By the time we had been married for 7 years, we had moved into the most beautiful home we had ever lived in. We met and became friends with most of our neighbors, but our best friends lived right across the street. Bob Antrust was a man who, by the age of 40, seemed to have a good life. Over the next few years, Bob became the friend I had lost after the Jeff incident. We played golf together. We went fishing. We were hunting. And we had a lot of barbecues. Our wives also became friends. But they were never as close as Bob and I. Bob and I had a lot in common, but also a lot of differences. Bob always wanted to be noticed and admired. He craved things. He always wanted to have the best of everything. Bob was proud that, unlike me, he owned the business he worked for. Bob had a network of printing houses and a dream to make his network national or even global. I worked for a large construction company. I had degrees in architecture and civil engineering, but I worked for someone else as an engineer and site manager. For Bob, looks were everything. He drove an aging and unreliable Bentley that he bought at an estate sale. The car was once beautiful, but Bob could barely maintain it. Parts and maintenance cost a lot of money. I drove a brand new 2014 Mustang GT. I loved my car, even though Bob disdained it. But despite his statements, I saw him secretly glance at her several times. And he always noticed when people complimented my car. Our wives also differed in their approaches. Tammy was a homemaker. Bob's wife, Samantha, was the secretary. The only time I remember anything weird between us was about 6 months ago. This was right after Tammy and I celebrated our 7th wedding anniversary. We were on the porch behind our house and Bob asked me if I had ever thought about trading. "What exchange?" I asked. "Is this another offer to sign up for golf lessons at the club?" "Heck, Bob, we play golf for fun. I'm not going to pay $100 to have some former golf pro watch me hold a club and tell me what's wrong. If these guys were any good, they'd still be playing on the pro tour. So why would I swing a putter like the guy who lost?" "I'm not talking about sharing experiences, Dave," he said. "You know, the one where we pick a night or two every week where you turn left and drive into my yard and I turn right and drive into yours. Then we go into each other's house and do whatever comes to mind." "Bob, are you out of your mind?" I said. "Tammy would never agree to this, and neither would Samantha. Samantha went home a little early because she had to get up for work the next morning. But when I looked at Tammy, I saw something unexpected. Darling, I told you a long time ago that I love you and I am your property. I will do whatever you want." "Well, I don't want you to do that," I replied sharply. "Bob, I think it's time for you to go home." I was furious. It seemed like I was about to lose another friend. It seemed like every guy I knew wanted to sleep with Tammy. In Bob's case, it didn't make sense. Samantha was beautiful. In terms of pure aesthetics, she was much more attractive than Tammy. Bob was a fool. There were a lot of things going through my head that night when Tammy and I went to bed. I remembered the song that was played at our wedding reception. The one song I chose to dance to was part joke and part confession. Tammy knew that as a child growing up in Royal Oak, Michigan, I took guitar lessons at the Music Castle on Woodward Avenue. My guitar teacher was Mike Skill, who played in the band The Romantics. So when I asked to play Talking in Your Sleep at our wedding reception, everyone thought it was a tribute to my youth, but there was more to it. The lyrics to this song were running through my head when we went to bed. When you close your eyes and you go to sleep, and it's down to the sound of a heartbeat. I can hear the things that you're dreaming about. When you open up your heart and the truth comes out. The words to that song ran through my head, and as Tammy fell asleep, I focused on staying awake. It's not that I don't need sleep. I had another hard day ahead of me on the construction site, but I needed more confirmation. And after an hour or so, I heard Tammy start mumbling. "You tell me that you want me. You tell me that you need me. You tell me that you love me." And I know that I'm right, 'cause I hear it at night. I listened carefully and heard the words I needed to hear from Tammy herself. "Love you, Davy," she murmured. "Love you so much. Don't be angry." Backed into a pole and busted my tail lights. "Love you, Davy." I was angry. Tammy told me that some kid crashed into her car, broke her tail lights, and then drove away before she could write down his license plate number. Our insurance went up when I filed for reimbursement, but I was much happier than that nothing happened. I fell asleep with the Romantics guitar riffs ringing in my head. I hear the secrets that you keep when you're talking in your sleep. I hear the secrets you keep when you talk in your sleep. I felt much better. I hugged Tammy, and she sighed contentedly as I joined her in her sleep. From the first night Tammy slept with me in my apartment, I noticed something about her. It probably didn't get through to everyone because, as Tammy told me, I may not have been the first guy she slept with, but I was the only one she ever slept with. This may be why I was the only person who seemed to know that my wife was talking in her sleep. Each of us lies, hides the truth, or simply bends it a little. Tammy was no exception. But whatever was on her mind, be it good, bad, or anything in between, it came out while she slept. And it came straight from her subconscious. I knew so much more about Tammy than she could ever tell me. So that night, I was delighted that the only thing she talked about was that, as usual, she loved me, and that she broke the taillights herself and lied about it. Tammy lied about it because she had a habit of crashing into things when she drove. Tammy was a terrible driver. That's why, no matter how much I loved her, Tammy was never allowed to drive my Mustang. A couple of days later, on a bright and beautiful Saturday morning, Tammy walked up to me as I was washing my car. "Honey, I need your help in the garden," she said, "and I'm willing to pay for it." When Tammy said, "pay for it," we both knew she was talking about something sexual. This was the way Tammy always wanted to do things. We had more sex than any other couple I knew. As we got older, Tammy's sexual interest grew. I never complained about it. She never wanted anything weird or kinky, she just loved being in my arms. But she used sex as a currency for everything. From changing a light bulb, she couldn't reach to kissing her. This always seemed funny to me. "Dave, come here and kiss me," she said. "I'm willing to pay for it." So I followed her into the garden she had planted behind the garage. Gardening was more of a hobby for Tammy than anything else. It was something she would do outside, usually while I was busy working on my Mustang. But it was also a social event for her. And that day, a couple of our neighbors who also had gardens came to her to help her. "I brought my husband, he's a genius," she told the women standing there with cold glasses of lemonade. They looked at the ground around a couple of plants and a lot of weeds. After they discussed the problem of removing weeds and aerating areas between small fragile plants and the difficulty of doing so with a full-size rake, I suggested one of those little hand tools. They rejected the idea out of hand because with smaller tools they couldn't get enough leverage to break through the dense clay. "Think about it, honey," Tammy said. She and her friends walked around our deck and sat down at the table to drink lemonade and chat. I looked behind the rake. I had the idea of cutting off the ends of the rake, leaving only 2 or 3 tines. Anyway, a few days after I hit myself hard with a rake Tammy left in the barn door, I invented what we called the pike bayonet. Bob came that Saturday to apologize. "Dave, I was probably drunker than I thought," he said. "I probably shouldn't have suggested that idea to you so soon. How about we play golf?" I noticed that while he was waiting for me to get my clubs, he spent a lot of time looking at Tammy's breasts and at her ass as she bent over to serve the other women drinks. He smiled when he noticed me looking at him. "Bob, why did you even suggest this, sober or drunk?" I asked. "You already have a very beautiful wife. Samantha is probably the most beautiful woman on the block." He smiled when I said that and nodded. I could almost see the gears turning in his head. But I was still surprised the next day when it happened. Tammy and her friends went down the street to look at one of the women's new kitchen cabinets. A few moments after Tammy left, someone knocked on my door. I walked to the door and saw Samantha. I opened the door and started to tell her where Tammy had gone, but she came in. She seemed nervous and my anxiety increased. Samantha never spent much time with me, and honestly, she only spent enough time with Tammy to be socially active. Her relationship with Bob was different from mine with Tammy. I was interested in what she wanted. Samantha was taller and slimmer than Tammy. She was also beautiful. She had long red hair with waves and ringlets flowing down her back almost to her butt. She had long, slender legs and a very thin waist. Her breasts, unlike Tammy's large breasts, were only handfuls, and her little butt was well formed, but it wasn't like Tammy's. Standing so close to her, I could see the smoothness of her skin. The light freckles that covered her cheeks and nose were flawless, and her scent was intoxicating. "Do you need something, Samantha?" I asked. "Tammy probably won't be back for another hour." "I didn't come to see Tammy," she said. "Bob sent me to show you something." Then she took off her coat, and underneath it she was naked. Her body, although thin and petite, was more beautiful than I had ever imagined. The freckles appeared again, this time dancing lightly across the top of her breasts, and although it took more strength than I thought I had, I picked up her coat and handed it to her. "Tell Bob he's a fool, tell him the answer is still no, and that we're not friends anymore." She quickly put on her coat, confused, and left. I was beside myself with anger. Apparently telling Bob no wasn't enough. Now he tried to seduce me by offering his own wife. Bob came back later that day and tried to apologize again. I screamed at him to get out of my territory. I told him not to come back anymore. He looked very offended and continued to mutter about how I didn't understand anything. Over the next couple of weeks, Bob called or came over every couple of days. Tammy didn't understand my anger at him. She urged me to listen to what he had to say, which only irritated me even more. I put my name on the notice board at the golf club and found a new golf partner. And almost every day when I left the house for work, I saw Samantha leaving for her office. Sometimes she smiled and waved at me, but most days we pretended not to see each other. I'm used to Bob not being in my life. But just as I got used to it, it came back in a way I least expected. I had to remember that Bob always seemed to get what he wanted in the end. I had a really tough day at a construction site. We lost several expensive pieces of equipment. I had to fill out a bunch of forms and call the main office to see if they could be replaced or repaired. The losses also set us back on schedule. We would have to make up for lost time, which probably meant overtime or working on Saturdays. So by the time I got into bed, I just wanted to sleep. Tammy snuggled up to me and we fell asleep as usual. I don't know what I was dreaming about when I woke up, but more than a dream is over. I didn't slowly come out of sleep, I woke up instantly. Anger pooled in my stomach and rage burned in my heart as I heard the words. No, I won't tell Davy. He'll be upset. Just keep going, Bob. Just keep loving me, Bob, she muttered. Tears rolled down both my cheeks for what I had lost. I probably always knew deep down that it would end up something like this. On the other hand, I got 7 years out of a relationship that no one really believed would last more than a few weeks. I lay in bed listening to Tammy mumble every now and then. But deep in my heart, even though I knew my marriage was over, there was one more thing I needed to figure out. I needed to figure out how to get back at Bob. More than pain, more than sadness, more even than love, I felt the need for revenge. I needed to know the best way to get back at Bob. I got out of bed, trying not to wake my soon-to-be ex-wife. I looked at her and cried again. The next morning, I got up and left the house early. And as if fate pushed for this, so did Samantha. I drove out of my driveway and slowly drove down the street. As I stopped at the stop sign on the corner, Samantha pulled up behind me. I got out of the car and pointed to a restaurant at the end of the next block. She nodded. We both pulled into the parking lot, and I walked up to her car. As I remember, you don't usually leave this early, I said. You're not leaving so early either, she replied. I need to get to work early to apply for new equipment, I said. We're behind schedule, so I'm going to have a very long day. You always worked hard, she said. I wish it would rub off on Bob. You still haven't said why you're here so early, I said. She looked down at the table. I wanted to leave early to avoid you, she said. But why? I asked. Because of what happened a couple of weeks ago, she said. I was quite embarrassed that my husband was trying to use me as a negotiator, but it was even more awkward to be rejected. Samantha, I didn't reject you, I said. I just didn't want to play by Bob's rules. I married Tammy, and I'm not into this whole swap thing. I think when people get married, they do it for love, and they stay together and are true to their vows. Remember that part about staying faithful in everything. I remember well, she answered, laughing. But all I hear from Bob lately is him complaining that he wishes my breasts were as big as Tammy's. If it's not that, then he's talking about the way her butt moves when she walks. Tammy has her flaws, just like we all do, I replied sharply. I tried to calm down. I didn't know how much Samantha knew about what was going on, so I couldn't trust her. It wouldn't do me any good if she found out I knew and ran to tell Bob. How about breakfast? I suggested. She nodded, and we went inside and sat down at the table. I was always jealous of Tammy, she said. You and her always seemed so in love. You discuss everything together, and you make all decisions together. Bob never listens to me about anything. I'm trying to find another job so we can put money into keeping the store afloat. Really, shops? I interrupted. Why not close those that are not profitable? Don't tell Bob I told you, but we only have one store. We had two for a while, but we closed the second store a couple of years ago. Network printing houses are pushing us out of the market. They have larger budgets, lower operating costs, and a recognizable name. I begged Bob to accept the offer and sell Kinko's, but he refused. He can be very stubborn sometimes. He likes to pretend to be the big boss. Samantha and I had a good breakfast and an even better conversation. After the first few painful moments, we didn't talk about Bob and Tammy again. I must admit that I still intended to do something bad to her husband, but talking to Samantha eased my bitterness a little. During the day, when I could take a break, I talked to a few guys about divorce lawyers and spent my lunch break at the shop. I bought several of those little wireless cameras. My plan was to install them in several places around the house. Installing the cameras was a simple task. I placed one inside the housing of a new outdoor light fixture I installed. While Tammy was cooking dinner, I installed one in the living room, one in the guest room, one in our bedroom, and the last one above the back door. I was confident that I had covered most of the possible rooms. I knew the cameras probably wouldn't be allowed in court, but there were a few other ways I could use them. Tammy seemed upset that I didn't want to have sex that evening. I simply told her that the extra time at work had drained all my energy and I would make it up to her once we caught up on the project. One advantage was that Tammy was terrible with computers. She might check her email and go to Facebook, but that was about it. So there was no need to hide the program that I used to compile video from cameras. I planned to just check the video every morning before going to work. When I got home the next evening, I was dying to check the cameras, but knew I had to wait until the next morning. Tammy rarely got up when I did this, so I could safely test them then. Tammy had a surprise for me that night. She wanted us to have dinner at the neighbor's house. Which neighbor? I asked, thinking it was one of her gardening friends. Samantha and Bob's, she said. There's no chance of me sitting at a table with that idiot again, I said. Did I already tell you this, or weren't you listening? I already told him we were coming, she said. You mean him? I asked. Samantha was still at work, she said nervously, but I'm sure she doesn't mind. Great, I said. The three of you will have fun. I'll go tell him we're not coming, she said. But I still don't understand why you're so stubborn. I just turned around and left her standing there. Things were quickly getting out of control. While Tammy ran across the street to tell Bob we weren't coming, I managed to run into the office and watch the video of that day. I learned two things. The first one broke my heart. Tammy definitely slept with Bob. I had video proof of this. Second, the camera deal wasn't that good. These were video cameras only without sound. Over the next few days, I continued to record what was happening in the house. For some reason, Tammy and Bob only met once a week. Wednesday was their big day. Other events were happening in the background during this time that were further damaging my marriage. First of all, I couldn't bring myself to have sex with Tammy. I couldn't even bring myself to hug her when we were sleeping. It felt like sleeping with a stranger, and she noticed it. This led to even more friction between us, and Tammy kept trying to talk about it, which only led to more arguments. Another thing that happened was that my breakfasts with Samantha became almost a daily occurrence. This is what helped me understand why Wednesday was chosen as the day for Bob and Tammy's meeting. Bob usually made his weekly deposits into the bank on Wednesday. He always went there right after lunch. So if he stayed longer than it took to go to the bank, the two guys working with him would just assume he had lunch after going to the bank. I think he also chose this day because both Samantha and I were less likely to come home unexpectedly in the middle of the week than on a Monday or Friday. This was especially true in my case. I haven't done this lately, but I often took long lunch breaks to spend time with Tammy at home. I also noticed from the video footage that children in the area had a habit of ringing the doorbells of some houses and running away. It happened that day. Video footage shows Tammy and Bob were just getting started when this happened. They both looked towards the front door and Bob ran out the back door into the barn. Tammy answered the door and saw children running down the street. She returned and let Bob back into the house, but both of them were in a bad mood. Bob left and went back to work. The next morning, Samantha was a little more reserved than usual. She used to trust me and told me that last night she and Bob had a big fight. She came home from work and found Bob walking from side to side, waiting for sex. She was tired after work, but he didn't take no for an answer. She just let him do what he wanted, just to get it over with quickly. He became upset at her lack of enthusiasm. This was the first time I saw her beautiful face distorted with tears. I couldn't help myself. I slid down to her side of the booth and hugged her. She buried her face in my shoulder and just cried. "I feel like I was taken advantage of by my own husband," she said quietly. "It should not be. It should be like you and Tammy. We both have to want it." When I looked into her eyes, I thought she could sense what was going on between Bob and Tammy, but maybe I was wrong. "Ever since you said no to the trade, he's been a real jerk," she said. "Bob just wasn't used to being rejected." "I just don't understand why he even wanted this," I said. "Samantha, I don't want to ruin our friendship, but you are so beautiful. I can't understand why he's fixated on Tammy." "It's easy," she said. "Bob sees me as some kind of little doll. He can dress me up and take me out to show his clients and friends. But I don't have big breasts like Tammy, and he always talked about her ass. He thinks she must really love sex." I was shocked. I guess I never thought about how Tammy and I acted around other people, but we were quite noticeable. "Have we talked about this so openly?" I asked. She smiled, lowered her head, and nodded. "Sometimes we got the impression that you two were sneaking out to do this even when we were at your house," she said. "And most of the time it was her who dragged you along just as often as you led her away, and you weren't so subtle when you tried to sneak up on her ass or breasts, and she just smiled when you did it. Bob and I never acted like that." "But you are so beautiful," I said in shock. I whispered to her, "I don't understand how he could keep his hands off you." Her face turned pale, like most natural redheads, and for a moment it turned red, like her hair. I thought maybe I had gone too far. I was about to apologize, but then she looked up at me. "Dave, sometimes I really wish you would take Bob up on his offer." She then literally ran out of the restaurant in embarrassment. As I sat there, an idea began to form in my head. Perhaps the best way to get back at Bob and Tammy would be to sleep with Samantha. But I dismissed the thought as quickly as it came. Samantha was too good a person for me to do that. I decided that the best way to handle the situation would be to catch them off guard and give Bob what he deserved. I was just going to beat up my old buddy and then divorce Tammy. And I needed to catch them in the act because my videos couldn't be admitted as evidence. I also wanted a disinterested third party to be there when I caught them. I decided that Kirk James, who was our neighbor, would be the perfect person to do this. Kirk worked at the Ford dealership that serviced my Mustang. Often, after I had work done on the car, Kirk and I would go out for a test drive so I could show him or get him to feel a problem I noticed in the car. My plan was to take the car in for service on Tuesday. I'll take a taxi back home, and on Wednesday afternoon Kirk and I will drive home, and I can pretend to listen to some little knocking or vibration. We'll pull up and I'll invite Kirk over for a beer. This usually happened anyway, so it wouldn't arouse suspicion. Kirk and I will go in and find Bob and Tammy having sex, about to have sex, or just finished. I'll beat Bob up and immediately throw Tammy out of the house and file for divorce. Unfortunately, the plan, like most, did not work out as expected. Over the weekend, I tried to improve my relationship with Tammy. By Sunday, it was already hanging on me. She was smiling constantly again and rubbing herself against me. It was almost as if we had never fought. But late on Sunday night, she ruined everything. "Honey, can you do one little thing for me?" she asked in her most seductive voice. I was sure that she wanted me to have sex with her. Almost a week had passed, and Tammy was an extremely sexy woman. I was ready to sacrifice myself. As much as I hated her at that moment for cheating, I have to admit that Tammy was really good in bed. This will be the part of our relationship that I will miss, if nothing else. I started massaging her shoulders as she spoke. Can you at least talk to Bob? She said. He doesn't really have many friends besides you. You started playing golf with the other guys and I lost control. For the first time since I met her, I screamed at Tammy. Even when we fought, my voice might rise, but I never just yelled at her. Fuck you, Tammy, I screamed. Fuck you and Bob. What the hell is going on between you two? Nothing, dear, she said. I just see him sometimes, and he looks so sad. I didn't talk to him, but I remember all the fun times we spent together. Sometimes even his arrogant wife would join in. Forget it, I don't want to make you angry again. It's too late, I replied sharply. For the rest of the day and evening, whenever Tammy approached me, I would simply go somewhere else. That evening, I was on the deck behind the house and Tammy came up behind me. I drank beer and looked at the moon, thinking about what my life would be like next. I thought about Tammy and us. I felt like this was something we couldn't handle. I didn't see any way out. When we first became a couple, 7 years ago, I told Tammy that if she ever cheated on me, we would break up. Apparently, she forgot it. I also thought about what my life would be like in the future. I thought about all the people who warned me against marrying Tammy. I was still thinking about it when she came up to me. Sorry, Davy, I'll stop trying to make peace between you and Bob, she began. Without letting her finish, I went into the garage. On Monday, she watched me and tried to talk to me, but I was on the defensive. On Monday, I also noticed that Samantha was waiting by her car when I left the house. She nodded, and I realized she wanted to have breakfast. We skipped a few days after she admitted that she regretted not accepting Bob's trade offer. Sorry, Dave, she said. I missed breakfast with you. But I was too ashamed after what I said to see you. It was funny. She was already blushing from embarrassment at what she had just confessed. This only added to her beauty. I was so used to Tammy's brazen, straightforward behavior that this was a real relief. Tammy never hides anything. If we were having lunch with another couple, even if it was her own parents, she would simply express her feelings. I remember her shocking her gardening friends a couple of times when she suddenly announced, "Sorry, ladies, my husband wants sex." They were embarrassed or just laughing, while Tammy just grabbed my hand and dragged me into the house. Samantha was too shy and reserved for that. We ate breakfast, and to change the subject, she started talking about my least favorite topic. Bob misses you, she said quietly. We haven't really stopped fighting since you. Since what? I asked. How you rejected me, she said shyly. But I don't blame you. I'm not very sexy. I burst out laughing, splattering bits of bacon everywhere. One of the pieces landed on Samantha's face near her mouth. A few more fell onto her blouse. What's so funny? She asked. Then her tongue came out and licked the piece of bacon near her mouth. She extended her finger and picked up one of the pieces of bacon and ate it too. God, I wish I were Bob, I said. This made her smile and again that shy blush. But at least this time she didn't run away right away. Monday evening, I found myself in the garage. I used my tuner to dial in a more aggressive profile. This would lower my gas costs, but make the car faster and improve acceleration. What I really needed was for the car to get louder. I was sure that when Tammy and Bob heard the car pull up, he would run into the barn to hide. There was only one door, and I would have caught him there. Tammy looked in the garage a couple of times and tried to ask what I was doing with the car, but I didn't answer her. Tuesday morning, I kissed Tammy before leaving for work. Her eyes flew open, and she latched onto me with her tongue. Stay with me, she said. I can't, honey, I said. We're so behind schedule that I can't afford to miss work. Sometimes I wish you owned your own business like. She started, but then covered her mouth as she realized what she had just done. I just turned around and left. At breakfast with Samantha, she smiled like I've never seen her smile. Her mood was lighter and more cheerful. Every time our eyes met, she smiled. It seemed to me that she was dying to tell me something. "Dave, can I ask you a favor?" she said. "Of course," I replied. "Okay," she said excitedly. "Bob will try to talk to you this weekend. I think he will bring up the topic of exchanging partners again. He yells at me and tells me not to ruin everything this time. So please, could you just agree?" I was shocked. "Sorry, Dave," she said. "I just thought." She suddenly stood up, and I grabbed her hand to stop her from leaving. "Sammy, you got it all wrong," I said. "I would really like to be with you." She was still squirming and trying to escape. "So why?" she asked. "You don't think I'm a worthy trade for your sexy wife, do you?" "No, Sammy," I said. "I just think you're too valuable to be traded around like a piece of furniture. I think a woman like you should be loved and adored. I also think that when you marry someone, you should honor your marriage vows. If I were married to you." Her face became so red that I thought she was going to explode. She pulled her hand out of mine and ran out of the restaurant. When I got home Tuesday evening, Tammy was just leaving the house to do some gardening. She ran up to me in shock when she saw me get out of the taxi. "Are you okay, Davy?" she asked. "Where's Mustang?" "At the dealership," I said. "I had them check it out." "Why didn't you call me? I could come and pick you up," she said. "I thought you'd be too busy trying to make peace between me and Bob," I snapped. Then I went into the house, leaving her standing outside. I had to plan everything carefully. I took my time getting changed and then fired up the grill. Tammy saw what I was cooking and came over to have a look. She could see the deck from the garden. She used the tip of a pickaxe that I made for her. I forgot about it. When she saw the 2 steaks and salads I prepared, she smiled and hugged me. "I love you so much, Davy," she exclaimed. "Can we talk things through?" I nodded, and as the sun set, we sat down at a small table to eat. "I don't like Bob," she said. "I always thought he was a jerk. I put up with him because he was your best friend. It seems like you've been angry all the time since you stopped talking. You're unhappy, Dave, so I'm unhappy. And with all this pressure at work, I just wanted you to be happy again." "I loved you more than anything in this world, Tammy," I said. "So when Bob started talking about trading, it just made me angry. You belong to me, no one else." She laughed then. "Of course I'm yours, silly. Bob didn't talk about forever. He meant an hour or two. Many of our friends did this. It's just a way to add variety to your relationship and keep it fresh. I thought you'd like the chance to sleep with Samantha." "Why don't you love her?" I asked. "We've lived here for 4 years," she said. "She never comes unless she's with Bob, and even then she doesn't say much. Whenever she did it, it was usually about you and how good you were. She's a lot prettier than me, so I started to get nervous because I didn't want her anywhere near you. She's too beautiful. But after a while, I noticed that you weren't even looking at her, so I didn't feel threatened anymore. Then I realized that you love me, and no woman, no matter how beautiful she is, will ever change that. Of course, now I'm not sure anymore." "Why?" I asked. "Because you have not fulfilled your marital duty for 10 days, 9 hours, and 43 minutes, she grinned. I smiled. "There's no time like the present," I said, and her eyes lit up and she nodded. "What about the garden?" I asked. "To hell with the garden, Davy," she exclaimed. She quickly grabbed a garden trowel from the deck and threw it into the shed. I remembered hitting myself with this tool once when it was a rake. I should have talked to her about putting her tools away, but I wasn't thinking about it at the time. We never made it home. Tammy pulled down her shorts and turned off the outside lights. She lay down on one of the lounge chairs and beckoned me towards her, taking off her shirt. The next morning, I felt like a wrung-out rag. I was exhausted and weak, in every sense of the word. It was like a hangover. I felt terrible, but I had so many fond memories of how I got to this point. Tammy snored loudly, loud enough to make most bulldozers jealous. I kissed her lightly and went to work. At breakfast, Samantha looked at me in a way I had never seen before. I didn't see a single smile from her. Some serious thought was on her mind. I loved watching her eat. She took such neat little pieces, and she seemed to enjoy the taste of every dish on her plate. Finally, when she finished, she looked at me. "You like to watch me eat," she said. I couldn't tell if it was a statement or a question. "Okay," she said. "I realized what was happening to you." I smiled. I couldn't wait to see what she had to say. For some reason, she was very serious. I was sure she knew what I was going to do with Bob. "You really confused me for a while," she said, "especially yesterday. But now I understand you. I thought about this all day. You have a problem, Dave. The same as mine. Do you love me? You love me very much. But you're torn between Tammy and me. I know you're married to her, Dave, but there's something going on between her and Bob. They talk too often. But I know Bob. He'll get tired of begging you to give him a chance with her and find someone else. So you need to decide. Do you care about me as much as I think you do? Or do you want to see Bob give me to someone else? Do you really want to see Bob hand me over to someone who won't care about me the way I think you care?" "Okay," I said. "You won. If Bob asks me to do this trade thing, I'll say yes." I only lied through my teeth because I really wanted her to know that I cared. It wasn't love. At least I didn't think so. Maybe it was a weakness. Maybe I just wasn't ready to be alone and I needed to keep her by my side. Either way, it was a harmless lie. It's also a fact that Samantha was even less knowledgeable than I was. She didn't know that Bob had already slept with Tammy. I wondered what she would do when everything was exposed. Another problem was that sex with Tammy the day before really remained on my mind. It seemed like a crime to get rid of a woman who was so good. Perhaps the answer would be to simply punish her. Tammy was clearly afraid of losing me to Samantha. Perhaps there was a way to punish both Tammy and Bob. What if I start telling Tammy how great sex is with Samantha? I was so busy thinking about alternative plans that when I got to work and was immersed in solving a few concrete problems on the second floor, I forgot about everything else. When Kirk called to tell me that the car was fine and that he would drop it off at my house, my secretary took the message. I inspected the renovations done above the main entrance and was very pleased. I had just told the guys that I wanted them to know how to work with concrete when the call came. I looked at my cell phone and saw Tammy was calling. I don't know why, but I answered. "Dave, you need to come home now," she said. Her voice sounded somewhat manic. I could tell she was crying, and I remembered what was probably going on. "I can't come home in the middle of the day," I snapped. "I have 100 things to do." "Dave, honey, this is an emergency," she said. "I really need help." "What emergency?" I asked. "Honey, this is Bob. He—" I hung up abruptly. I wished I could carry out my plan and confront her and Bob. I got angry again. To hell with her and Bob, I thought. Bob could have kept it. All these stupid old proverbs were running through my head. "You can't make a mistress out of a lecher," was one of them. "Once a cheater, always a cheater," was another. The more I thought about it, the more it seemed right that Bob would get Tammy and I would get Samantha. And just as I was thinking about Samantha, my phone rang again. I picked up the phone, thinking it was Tammy. I was surprised when Samantha's voice came from the receiver. "Dave, I really need you," she said. "You need to come home now." "What the hell is going on?" I asked. "Why does everyone want me to come home?" "This is Bob," she began. "Fuck Bob," I shouted. "Your wife did it," she snapped. "She had sex with him and then killed him. Your wife killed my husband. I want her to go to jail," she screamed. I asked one of the guys at the construction site to take me home. When I arrived, it was a complete mess. There were at least 5 police cars parked on the lawn. I approached the police and demanded that they remove the car from my lawn. One of the policemen looked at me and asked who I was. I showed him my ID and again told him to move the car. He waved to one of the other officers, who apologized and moved the car away. I noticed 2 officers were talking to an upset Tammy, and another group of officers were talking to an equally upset Samantha. They both noticed me at the same time and tried to run up to me. They got to me at the same time and started fighting. The police separated them. "Can someone tell me what the hell is going on here?" I shouted. At that moment, two strong orderlies dragged a stretcher past us. I looked at the body on the stretcher. It was Bob. He didn't have a sheet on, but for some reason there was a rake on it. "He's alive," I said. The two women's reactions were different. Tammy seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Samantha didn't like it. An hour later, we were all in the hospital waiting room trying to find out about Bob's condition. The police detective wanted to know what exactly happened. Tammy didn't want to talk about it in front of me. The detective insisted on an answer. She began to cry, but no one sympathized. "About 3 weeks ago, Bob suggested we try partner swapping," she began. "My husband categorically refused. Bob continued to convince me that this would be good for all of us. He had many arguments. And apparently Bob noticed that I couldn't stand Samantha. He took advantage of my weakness. He told me it would add variety to our marriage. But he also told me that this would show Davy once, and for all that Samantha may be prettier than me, but she's no good in bed." I know those were weak excuses, and yes, I have been absolutely faithful to Dave for the past 7 years. Anyway, I gave in, and we did it. I felt bad after that. I had never cheated on Dave before, and I decided I would never do it again. But Bob wanted to continue. He seemed to really like my body. I told him I was Dave's wife, not his. He told me that if I didn't keep having sex with him every time he wanted, he would have to tell Dave. He told me the only way to get out of this was to get Dave to agree. So he got that shy little miss there to throw herself at my husband. I was really scared at first, but all it did was show me that Dave loved me and he couldn't be fooled by just a pretty face. Dave told me years ago that if I ever cheated on him, we would break up. So the only way to save my marriage is if Dave agrees. But he just didn't want Samantha, and every time I suggested it, Dave would get angry with me. Anyway, today Bob came for his weekly dose of sex, and this time he brought another guy with him. As soon as we undressed, I heard it. It was a low growl coming from Dave's Mustang. He pulled into the driveway, and I thought Dave had arrived home. We're all panicking. I pushed Bob and the other guy out the back door. I told them to hide in the barn. Then Tammy began to cry. They ran into the barn, but as soon as Bob got inside, he stepped on, and she started sobbing then. I called an ambulance. He just fell and started twitching. The other guy ran away. I didn't know what to do. I was going to pull it out of his forehead, but the 911 operator told me not to touch it. I just stood naked and waited for them. They arrived in 5 minutes, but it seemed like an eternity. Samantha arrived home and saw all the police cars and came into the yard with a group of our neighbors. She started screaming that I killed him, and then I called Dave. She looked at me and I stared back at her. "Dave, you need to forgive me. I love you. It was an accident." "Maybe what happened to Bob was an accident," I said. "But you know how I feel about cheating." I looked at the officers. "Can I leave?" They looked at each other and discussed the fact that I didn't know about Bob and Tammy's affair, and that I wasn't home when the incident happened. "Yes, Mr. Pike, you are free to leave. We need to question your wife more. She may need a lawyer, so perhaps you should." "You heard her," I interrupted sharply. "She cheated on me. We're done. She can call her parents. I'm done with her." "No," she shouted as I left the room. I knew. I literally knew Tammy cheated on me with Bob. But the fact that everything came out only made me angrier. I guess deep down I hoped there was something more to it, some special or redeeming reason. But it was just ordinary nonsense. Our marriage didn't need any spice until Bob came along. As for the rest, I was married to her for the same amount of time and didn't cheat. In a way, I had to view this as partly my responsibility for what happened to Bob. Maybe it was a perfect storm of circumstances, but it was an accident, wasn't it? On the other hand, no one forced Bob to come to my house and seduce my wife, so he deserved what he got. And no one forced Tammy to do it. so she deserved what she got too. I am going home. I made myself something to eat and spent an hour aimlessly turning the food around on my plate. Then I started doing what I always do when I need to think. I started washing the Mustang. I had been doing this for an hour or two when a car pulled up. My father-in-law came out and slowly walked towards me. "You missed a spot," he said. Somehow he was smiling. I looked where he was pointing, but didn't see anything. "I guess that's life," he said. "We all see things from different perspectives. Sometimes what is obvious to us is not so obvious to others. And sometimes people who are not as close to the situation can have a better angle and see things that we miss because we are too close to them." He paused and took the rag from me. He wiped away a stain I hadn't noticed. "This situation between you two is just a bump in the road," he continued. "You two were driving on a smooth road. Then you hit a bump. While you're driving over the bump, it feels terrible and scary. But a little later, you look back at the bump and the road becomes smooth again. After a while, you can barely remember the bump. You two will get through this and you'll be fine. But sometimes a bump in the road spoils the suspension or even breaks the axle, and the car is no longer worth anything," I said. "And most of the time, if the bump is bad enough, you remember it and never drive on that road again. You have to change the route you take or the way you get from point A to point B just to avoid that bump. Sometimes the best thing to do is just fix the road so it can't damage your car." When Tammy and I first met, we made some promises to each other. "She always knew what would happen if she ever cheated on me," I said. "Listen, Dave, you were together for 7 years. It seems stupid to throw it all away because she lost her head for a few weeks. She just wants to get home so you can talk, okay?" he said. "I think it would be better if she went home with you," I said. "We have nothing to talk about. I'll call my lawyer so we can start the divorce process." "I love you, Davy. I did something stupid. Can't you forgive me?" "I'm already in enough trouble," she said from behind me. "You being in trouble has nothing to do with me or what we once called our marriage," I said. "You wouldn't be in this situation if you hadn't cheated on me. After 7 damn years, I was wrong. So what? And you had a chance to try someone else. It wasn't about love, Dave. It was only sex. I'm already tired of him. I only did it a second and third time because he said he would tell you about it. In a way, I'm glad you found out. When you're ready to act like an adult and forgive me, I'll be with my parents." "I forgive you," I said quickly. She smiled and came closer. "So I can come back?" she asked. "Why don't you come back tomorrow while I'm gone?" I said. "Why should I wait until then?" she asked. "Because this way you can pack as much of your stuff as you can carry, and I won't be here," I said. "It will be better for both of us. Well, at least for me. You don't seem to care about our marriage." "What do you mean?" she screamed. "If you cared about us, you wouldn't sleep with Bob knowing it would end our relationship," I said. "Dave, that was the problem," she said. "I was sure that we loved each other enough to survive a little shock. I thought you loved me as much as I love you." "I think I loved you more than you loved me," I said. "I have never cheated on you." "Why are you speaking in the past tense?" she asked. "You forgave me, remember?" "Tammy, I forgave you because I can't move forward in my life until I let go of what happened between us. I have no intention of being one of those divorced guys who lives in the past," I said. "Why are you still talking about divorce?" she asked. "Tammy, I still love you. I will probably love you for a long time," I said. "But our marriage is over. There's just no way I could ever trust you again. Without trust, we have nothing. I won't change the locks until you remove all your belongings." After that, I left, leaving her crying in the driveway while her father tried to calm her down. Being around Tammy only made me more upset. It really made me realize how distorted her attitude was. Even as she walked away, I got the impression that she was confident that things would eventually calm down. She didn't realize how serious the situation was. An hour after Tammy left, someone knocked on my door. It was Samantha. She stood shyly until I invited her in. "Will Tammy mind me being here?" she asked. Tammy doesn't live here anymore, I said. We're getting a divorce. The doctors operated on Bob for 4 hours, she said. He's, stable. They removed the thorn from his brain. Surprisingly, there was minimal damage to the brain stem. This is the part of the brain responsible for breathing and controlling most of the body's systems. It is difficult to predict the level of brain activity he will be capable of once the swelling subsides. His parents arrived, so I was able to go home and get some sleep. The police have decided not to charge your wife, she continued. They consider it an accident. I have to tell you, Dave, that my lawyers are suing her for wrongful death. After that, Samantha and I just sat on my couch, staring at the wall. Life was really strange. She just had a way of sweeping you off your feet when you least expected it. I think we were both a little broken at that point. Samantha was less broken than I was. Bob cheated on her constantly and complained about everything she did. She thought about divorce several times, but did not have the determination to do it. Also, despite appearances, she and Bob were barely making ends meet. They were always on the verge of losing their home due to the mortgage. They took out payday loans so often to pay bills that they had virtually no income left. As bad as it sounded, what happened to Bob might not have been such a bad thing for her. On the other hand, I was in such shock and more from Tammy's betrayal that I could barely function. I needed someone, something, any kind of comfort to hold me. I said a lot that night to Tammy's face, but I was a wreck. If it weren't for Samantha, I might have called Tammy that first night. We were both so emotionally exhausted that we fell asleep together. We woke up the next morning with our arms around each other and awkward smiles. Samantha ran across the street to take a shower, and I did the same. We met for breakfast as usual, only this time I went to work as usual and Samantha went back to the hospital. Strange, but I felt better at work. I called the lawyer I had chosen and asked him to fill out the paperwork and give it to Tammy. There was no point in waiting. 2 days later, Tammy received divorce papers. That same day, she learned that the district attorney had decided not to charge her in connection with Bob's injury. It had been ruled a tragic accident. But that same day, Samantha's lawyer filed a wrongful death lawsuit against her. Doctors were convinced that Bob's brain injury was too severe. There was little chance that Bob would ever regain consciousness. There was only a life ahead in which he simply existed and breathed, but did not actually live. Samantha was ready, as cold as it sounds, to disconnect him from the devices. His parents, especially his mother, resisted this. My lawyer decided that we should wait until the wrongful death claim was settled because it could lead to a better settlement for me. I didn't care about the settlement, I just didn't want to be tied to Tammy forever. Thus, in the morning in court, while the lawyers argued, I was forced to sit in the dock. One question kept running through my head over and over again. But before I could figure anything out, I was told that I could leave. I was out of my mind. There are no more questions, Tammy's lawyer repeated as I returned to my seat, still in shock. Somehow I made it to my seat when they called the next witness, but the debate in my head continued. I have always been gifted with the ability to see things sequentially. I could add up facts and predict with relative certainty the outcomes of seemingly random events. So while the lawyers argued and threw jargon at each other about whether Tammy was responsible or at least to blame for Bob's condition and possible death, if they turned off the machines, I began to wonder if I was to blame. A few weeks before Bob's accident, I almost killed myself by stepping on the same rake. A few days later, I stuck a pin into the rake. Soon after, I found out that Bob had slept with Tammy, and I wanted revenge. I watched on security cameras what would happen if Bob and Tammy were interrupted. I saw Bob run into the barn as the teenagers rang the doorbell. I actually planned for Bob to do exactly that when I pushed him into the barn. I arranged for myself and Kirk, who was to be a witness, to drive up in my Mustang, which could be heard from inside the house. And finally, I saw Tammy throw a rake into the shed hastily in her rush to have sex with me the night before their weekly meeting. I even remembered exactly where this rake was lying when we entered the house. Although it was not part of my plan, I literally prepared everything for what happened to Bob. I don't think I consciously wanted this to happen to Bob, but I think there was a very good chance that he would be maimed or injured. I may have hated Bob at the time for what he did to our friendship and my marriage. In some ways, I felt a little better, but I don't think he deserved what happened to him. I put all these thoughts aside when the trial ended for that day. I'll probably never come back to see how it all ends. I didn't really have any interest in how this would be resolved other than how it would affect my divorce. My lawyer could follow the case for me. As I put on my sunglasses and headed toward my Mustang, I heard someone running after me. I turned around and saw Tammy rushing towards me. "Davy, can we talk?" she asked. I wondered what she might want. We've been arguing in lawyers' offices for weeks. I miss you, she said. I could see the sadness in her eyes and face. Before I could answer, Samantha was there. The two women looked at each other, and before the words were spoken, the tension was so strong that you could feel it. "I guess I know why you weren't answering my calls," Tammy said. "I am not happy. I cry all the time. Poor Bob, or what's left of him, is slowly dying in the hospital, and you two are growing closer." "That's the difference," Samantha replied, "that we didn't start getting closer until you and Bob ended 2 marriages. And to be honest, Bob and I didn't really have much of a marriage. He was very unhappy with me, and I was no longer influenced by his nonsense. That's why he needed to find some stupid slut to have fun with outside of our marriage. Guess who he found?" "That's not true," Tammy said. "When I started with Bob, I did it because, well, it was going to help my marriage, not ruin it." "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard," Samantha laughed. "When you value something, you try to protect it. You keep it out of harm's way. It's like Dave's Mustang. Have you ever seen him just give the keys to someone? No, he doesn't even let that car get wet unless he washes it himself. And that's how he treated you. He treated you like something valuable, and you repaid him by sleeping with another woman's husband. You're an idiot." "Then idiocy is contagious," Tammy said, "because it seems like you're trying to do the same thing." Samantha just shook her head. "See what I'm talking about," she said. "You're too stupid to even see the difference. Bob always cheated on me. Bob was never happy with what we had or what we could afford. He always thought he deserved better, whether we had the money for it or not. And when we got what he wanted, he always wanted something else. As soon as he had something, it lost value for him. Bob didn't love you, Tammy. Before you knew it, he would let his friends have fun with you too, just to seem like a cool guy." Tammy's mouth dropped open, but she didn't say anything. I knew she remembered the last time Bob brought another guy. Dave, on the other hand, loved you so much that he was angry at Bob for even suggesting a trade. He ended his friendship with Bob for even offering to share you. I may not be as smart as you and Bob, but this sounds like love to me. My husband, the man I married, sent me to Dave to offer myself to him, just to convince Dave that we should trade. Does that sound like value to Bob?" Tammy shook her head as tears streamed down her cheeks. "It was a mistake," she said. "I've already admitted it." "No," I said, joining the conversation. "A mistake is when you do something unintentionally. This is something you didn't plan to do. Sleeping with Bob was a conscious act. These are consequences of this action that you did not plan for. But even then you knew how I felt about cheating, so you knew what would happen if you got caught." "Davy, we were married for 7 years," Tammy said. "Have you ever thought about another woman?" "I'm human," I said. "I always watch. There are many beautiful women. But I married you, Tammy, and 7 years is nothing. They flew by like the blink of an eye. I always thought we would be married much longer, perhaps 70 years. There was nothing more to say. I turned and walked to my car. Tammy and Samantha continued talking. I later learned from Samantha that they were mostly talking about Tammy's hope that, even though they weren't friends, Samantha would be honorable enough to wait until our divorce was final before trying to start something with me. The court ruled in Samantha's favor. Even though Bob's accident was spontaneous, the judge found Tammy to be partially responsible. He awarded Samantha $100,000. He left it to the lawyers to decide how it would be paid since Tammy had no source of income. There was also the issue that since I had already filed for divorce and we were not living together, I was not responsible for her payments. Samantha is a different matter. She was beautiful and free for the first time in a long time. She has already begun to lean on me for emotional support. I think we helped each other through the worst. Samantha was embroiled in a legal battle with Bob's parents over the decision to disconnect him from the devices. They managed to settle the issue out of court. Bob's parents allowed Samantha to keep the $100,000 she won from Tammy. They covered the cost of Bob's care. Bob's insurance company exploited a loophole in the contract he signed to deny benefits. Since Bob died in the process of committing an illegal or immoral act, they are not required to pay. As for Samantha and I, we didn't have to wait. We have already started sleeping together. But that was all we had. Samantha, despite her beauty, was terribly awkward in bed. As bad as the first time was, I gave her a couple more chances. It also turns out that Samantha's personality isn't all that great. Samantha was very distant and very cold. She also had submissive tendencies that I am sure were manipulated by Bob. I wanted a woman I could love and who would love me, not someone who just did what I said. A very kind judge ruled on my divorce a few weeks later. Since Tammy's involvement with Bob was part of the court record, I did not have to prove infidelity on her part. I was awarded 60% of our assets. I bought our house from Tammy for her 40% of our equity. Tammy's share of our assets plus her share of the capital totaled about $80,000. She had to get a job and set up a payment plan for Samantha. Bob's parents moved him to a facility where care was much cheaper than hospital care. For the first few months, they visited him every day. Then it became a couple of times a week. After some time, it became a couple of times a month. The day Bob finally gave up and died, he was alone. Samantha came out on top. She sold Bob's printing business to Kinko's and sold her payments from Tammy to an annuity company. After a long, serious conversation about how we just weren't right for each other, she moved back across the country to the town where she grew up. I wished her all the best, and we remained friends. There were many women in the city that I dated, but nothing grabbed my attention. A big part of it was because I could no longer blindly trust and give my heart away. Tammy took it from me. There was also the problem that sex with Tammy was hard to compare. It seemed unfair to me. Everyone got what they deserved, except me. Where was my destiny? One day in the fall, about 6 months after Samantha left, a taxi stopped in my yard in the middle of the night. Tammy came out drunk. She looked terrible. She staggered to the door and began looking for the keys in her purse. She found them and opened the front door. I watched as she walked up the stairs, undressed, and got into bed. Almost a year of separation changed her. Tammy was never as beautiful as Samantha, but she was warm and loving. She also had a body made for sex. The bags under Tammy's eyes and the color of her skin indicated that she drank far more than she should have. This was the first time I saw her drunk. Her body has also changed over the years. She became thicker around the waist, and cellulite appeared on her buttocks and thighs. I took the phone from the bedside table and called her parents. I told them that Tammy arrived drunk and lay in my bed. Her father apologized and said he would come get her right away. I said it was late and that I would take her the next morning. It would be Saturday, so I didn't have to rush anywhere. When I woke up the next morning, Tammy was looking at me. "I know Samantha left," she said. "Why didn't you have sex with me, Davy? I know you wanted this. If you think I would stoop so low as to take advantage of a drunk woman, then it's probably a good thing we're not married anymore," I said. "It wouldn't be like that, and I wasn't actually drunk," she said. "I'm just tired of being alone. I'm also tired of being a fool." "We're divorced," I reminded her. "You are free and can arrange your life the way you want. Now you can do whatever you want because you're single." "I tried," she said. "Remember what it was like when I was younger? Davy, I can't be that girl anymore. You spoiled me. I need to know that the person I'm with cares about me. You mean like Bob? I asked. She started crying, and I felt really sorry. I hugged her, trying to comfort her, and something clicked. Everything in me told me this was wrong. I know it. When I finally took her home that evening, she was smiling, and I was embarrassed. She called me the next day, and I told her it was a mistake. This became our pattern over the next few months. She came over once or twice a week, and we had sex. It was a strange relationship. I'm sure she was trying to get me back somehow. I don't know what her plan was, but I wasn't going to complain. It took me a while, but eventually I figured out Tammy's game and let her go. I had to. She still didn't tell me the truth. I told Tammy that our relationship was only about sex. I told her there was nothing between us, and she told me she was okay with that. She deceived me. I thought she was hoping to get me back through sex, and it would probably work. But I hate lies. I was so used to having fun with Tammy and enjoying it that I let my guard down. One winter, I let her spend the night. "Love you, Davy," she murmured. "As soon as you get me pregnant, we will get married again. Everything will be fine." Once again, Tammy's sleep chatter saved me from a fate worse than death. Over the following weeks, I came to the conclusion that perhaps loneliness was my destiny. Perhaps I was paying for what happened to Bob. Perhaps loneliness was all I could have expected, but I'd rather be alone than be with a woman I can't trust. Tammy kept calling and trying to explain herself. She was completely puzzled as to how I figured out her plan since she hadn't told anyone. I never let her enter the house again. Loneliness became the norm for me, although well-meaning friends and neighbors tried to arrange for me to date women with whom they thought I had something in common. Everything changed the following spring. I was mowing the grass when a huge truck stopped in front of Samantha's house, which was empty. Several guys started unloading furniture from it. I went back to the mower. Then I heard him, the low hum of a powerful engine. I looked up as a red Mustang convertible pulled up behind the truck. The woman who got out of the car startled me. She was no taller than 5 feet. She had long black hair that went down to her buttocks, and those buttocks were exquisite. Her breasts looked like she was trying to hide 2 melons under her shirt. She had the most beautiful pale gray eyes I have ever seen. She looked me up and down and seemed pleased with what she saw. "I'm your new neighbor," she said. Her smile lit up everything around. It seemed as if she smiled and the sun shone brighter. "I need to ask," she began, then suddenly sighed. "Okay, say it." "Tell what?" I asked. "What are you thinking?" she said, lowering her voice to imitate a man, and then added, "How did they manage to put such a big ass on such a small girl?" "Do you know that some men think I'm beautiful?" she asked. "I'm really beautiful, but all men notice is my ass, not my mind, not how beautiful my face is, or even how sweet my personality is. Men only ever want to get to 2 things, to my car and my ass." "Wow, that's a statement," I laughed. "You were looking at both from the moment I pulled up." She smiled. She turned around and shook her butt. I was fascinated. What did you want, neighbor?" I asked. "A truck is blocking my driveway," she said in a honeyed voice. "Can I use yours until the truck leaves?" "Looks like it's going to rain soon," I said. "A car like yours shouldn't be left out in the rain." "What would you suggest?" she asked. "You want to put it in the garage so you can pretend it's yours, don't you?" I laughed with her. Then I took the keys out of my pocket. I pointed the key fob at my garage. "Your car is cute," I said, "but if I had a choice, I'd rather keep my hands on your ass." As soon as I said that, the garage door opened, revealing my Mustang. She ran into the garage and froze, looking at my wheels, my chrome exhaust pipes. My custom grille and front spoiler clearly captivated her. "How much?" "How much horsepower?" she panted. 486, I said cheerfully. She kissed me on the cheek and ran to her car. She drove into my garage. "I'll be back when they finish bringing my things in," she said. "You can feed me then." She kissed me again, this time on the lips. Her lips tasted like cherries, and I was so absorbed in its taste and aroma that I didn't even notice how one of the movers approached us. "What were you thinking of making for dinner?" she asked. "Grilled steak and salad," I replied. "What were you thinking about, kissing me like that? We barely know each other." She grabbed my hands and looked at my palms. "You have big hands," she said. "What does it mean?" I laughed. "I think my ass will fit just right in your hands, Dave." She laughed. When she saw my surprised face, she laughed even harder. "My cousin Samantha told me a lot about you. She thinks we should get along well. She thinks we are made for each other." "What is your name?" I asked. "Destiny," she said, giving me another one of her smiles. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.